So a very warm welcome to our speakers for this second panel this afternoon. To Adriana Schneider, theater director, performer and playwright, who's a member of the Colectivo Bonobando that is present physically and in the exhibition with works and performed in the last 2 days. To Rosa Eidelpes, who's a literary and cultural scientist who also is an author for the catalog and the web journal that accompanied the whole process of this project under the address Project Fichte. To Yesomi Umolu, who is the artistic director of this year's Chicago Architecture Biennale, and also the curator of the Logan Center for exhibitions at the University of Chicago, and to Jürgen Bock, who I have already introduced and who will begin the series of presentations. Maybe just a few words before I hand over to Jürgen. The abyss of ethnology, Fichte's relationship and his critique of ethnology as a discipline, as an academic discipline, have already been mentioned several times yesterday, today, and we will hear more about it in this panel, particularly from Rosa. And it maybe deserves to be sort of underlined that none of us, of course, is somehow institutionally or academically entitled by the discipline of ethnology as ethnologists, trained as or speaking for the discipline. We are 3 curators who have very different engagement with ethnology, with anthropology, particularly in relationship to art and to art history and to curatorial practice today. We have a literary scientist who has been engaging particularly with the German tradition or some parts of fringe positions within German ethnology that has some overlaps with where Fichte enters into the picture. And Adriana, who has, I think, of all of us, perhaps the sort of relationship that is most directly speaking back to the practice of ethnology, and undoing some of its legacies in the process. Personally, for me, I want to say a few words how we dare to engage with this discipline in its colonial legacy, which is one of the definitions of how one could interpret this choice of the title Abyss, and also why I consider personally, speaking for myself and for certain choices we've made here in the exhibition program, why staying with the trouble here, or why engaging, why the question of decolonizing that discipline might be an important engagement after all. Despite and in acknowledgement and in a permanent battle with the complicity of the ethnographic archive with the engineering of great divides, with otherings, and in the attempt to create this kind of fractal reading that Amilcar was bringing about. Perhaps, from within this engagement of several exhibition projects here dealing with canonization and in trying to find out, to problematize in the medium of the exhibition the very material we put on display, we engage with. I've mentioned this already in passing yesterday. This kind of exhibitions, of course, like this entire project here, runs into a certain risk of being a risk that we can also not absolve us from, and that we don't have under full control as well, of engaging and reinforcing and reproducing, or even just clinging to a libidinal investment, even as a critique to the object critiqued. And in particular, the format of this entire project, of course, is pretty much dominated by this antinomy and by this dialectics. And I think I want to just express how thankful, how grateful I am for all of you who have so far participated, spoken, for putting as much trust in us that you have actually put your voices up there, and that we really perceive that as a great gift, because it has also to do with using this kind of historical markers and positions within the German language, within the history of science, of poetry, of writing, of art history here, that becomes sort of a point through which we can provincialize certain discourses here that are not as easily overcome as we might wish. So there is this acknowledgement of a danger of this fractal reading, of course, being stopped short, and I just wanted to point that out again. Why is this important from my point of view, nevertheless? Because within this whole series of exhibitions dealing with canonization, we are trying to somehow go towards an unlimiting or debordering of art history that is a different model from the current kind of expansion of the canon that you see practiced in all of the big museums, and especially sort of the new universal or the revival of universal museums, whether they be in the Gulf or in Berlin. And this debordering is an attempt to counter the kind of reproduction of unquestioned assumptions that simply come with the very category of art, with the institution of art, with art as a value form, with art as in its division of labor as it has historically formed in Europe, that is often simply reproduced, and therefore there is not only a decolonialization happening in this process of expansion, but also in some aspects an intensification of colonial patterns that I think is important to discuss for us. So an unlimiting of art history or debordering means to sort of deconstruct that secluded sphere of art as well, and I think we have already heard in the previous panels powerful practitioners' views on that, but on an institutional level, for an institution situated here, having to deal with this historical genealogy, anthropology and ethnology presents also a kind of Janus-faced archive that is, on the one hand, an engine of this othering, an engine of this engineering of great divides, but of course it is also in many of its constitutive works an evolving practice, and one that might contain, or this is at least why I think it is necessary to engage with it in order to affect the sort of main narrative in art history particularly. It is also containing the seeds for what Sylvia Wynter would, echoing many other diasporic theoreticians before, call a counter-humanism made to the measure of the world, meaning an insistence on anthropological constants and the power of human invention, of the processes of mythopoetic world construction and of the strategies of survival, that by discarding the ethnographic archive altogether, one misses out on the productive construction of this as a counter knowledge. So this is just from my side, perhaps a few lines of thought of how I come to this topic that we're discussing today. And with that, Adriana, please.
Hi, bom dia, boa tarde, good afternoon, guten Tag. Yes, I can see the eyes. Okay, it's okay. So. I am not doing here a mediation. I am not the Bonobando producer. And I am not the one who just bring the group to Germany. I will not speak about Bonobando and Hubert Fichte. I am speaking with Bonobando, and I will try to speak with Hubert Fichte. I am with Bonobando. I am Bonobando. And inside of our work, we try to maintain our differences, our contradictions, because for us, the idea of dissent is the basis of what we try to do. So we tried to do the same with Hubert Fichte. For this, for our own work, we have to break the hierarchical ways inside our collective to create works of art, works of living. Our work try to exercise a radical collective creation. So here, this afternoon, I will try to play with something that I think it's very interesting at the work of Hubert Fichte, this performative writing. We talked about a lot about of this, and to me, for us, we are not visual artists. We came from theater, so for us, it's very interesting to see the material of Fichte like a dramaturgy. So that's the way we get in touch with Fichte. I will show a little film for you, okay? Please.
Foram 2 anos de residência artística.
E eu gostei de ver ali no palco, pô, uma galera de favela, preta, pá, fazendo uma parada.
Criamos o Bonobando, e aí a gente tá aí agora com Cidade Correria, graças a Deus.
Cada um tinha que falar a sua convivência, o que era a sua tribo, o que você era. Eu, Jardila Batista, eu gosto muito de conhecer as pessoas, de relacionar com elas. E, então eu quero saber como que ela é, conto da minha vida. Eu me apego muito às pessoas, então para mim não foi muito difícil. E o coletivo é como se fosse um pai para mim.
Tava relação. Quando a parada foi, filho. Caralho.
Meu Deus do céu. Acho que foi o nosso momento. Marcelo chegou, Vanessa chegou, a gente brilhou, filho. Aí a gente zoa, né, que a nossa entrada é, a gente vai fazer uma peça foda. Aí o Lucas e a Adriana falou pra gente, agora a gente tem uma peça foda de verdade.
O termo artista de periferia, todos esses termos que foram usados, eles davam conta durante um tempo, né, da arte que a gente era produzida na periferia. Mas eu acho que a coisa mudou, assim, o cenário mudou, a gente já está em outro lugar, já está em outro patamar. E quando continuam usando esse termo, hoje é para limitar, entendeu? Antes era visto como uma estética específica, hoje não, hoje é para limitar. Então, os artistas que vêm da periferia, são oriundos de periferia, eles ganham esse rótulo. Então, o mercado ele só se abre para esses caras para dar esse tipo de trabalho.
A galera fala da favela, eu não falo da favela, eu não posso falar da favela. E aí a Lívia chegou pra mim, Carla, tu não tá entendendo qual é teu lugar, esse é o teu problema. Eu falei assim, pô amiga, me explica, cara, porque eu não sou daqui, eu não sou de lá, eu não me sinto bem na Zona Sul, não me sinto bem aqui também com vocês, eu sou de onde, cara? Cara, tu ainda não entendeu? Você é ponte. Tu tá aqui pra fazer ponte da gente com eles lá. Porque tu entende os dois lugares, então tu vai chegar pra eles falando de coisas que eles não sabem. E tu vai chegar pra gente contando coisas que a gente não sabe. E a gente vai conseguir dialogar porque você tá aqui.
Eu sou uma cidade de correria, mas sim nessa emboscada. Primeiro eles chegaram de caravela, começaram com espada, mosquete, canhão. Porrete, carabina, aí vieram com cano, metralhadora, AR-15, 38, granada, e comeram geral, eles comeram geral na bala, eu sou a cidade de correria.
Quase todo santo dia tinha operação no morro, tinha tiroteio, tinha gente morta, e a gente era parado também, revistado. E eu tinha muito medo disso, inclusive de polícia, que desde quando eu era pequeno, eu pensava que o policial era policial ruim. Não são todos policiais ruins, tem muitos policiais bons no Rio de Janeiro. E eu tinha medo, e a minha reação era correr, porque sempre chegavam lá com agressividade, chegavam na favela com agressividade, com arma, apontando arma na cabeça dos outros, chegavam mais falando que bandido bom, bandido morto.
Sai da frente, lá vem eles, minha gente. Agora o chumbo é quente, eles têm toda a razão. Não fique aí se não quiser virar de ponto, ir pra cidade dos pés juntos dentro de um lindo caixão.
Depois de todo o tiroteio que teve, as mães gritando, tudo que aconteceu, o caveirão entrando, o caveirão correndo atrás dos outros, passando por cima, que eles não querem nem saber. A música cantando aquela música, eles entram na comunidade realmente cantando aquela música. Os moradores correndo do policial porque ele estava correndo atrás de qualquer preto. Não quer saber se é bandido, se é morador, se é nada.
Mataram os meus filhos! Eu vi essa cena. Eu falo para todo mundo que eu vi essa cena. Uma mulher que mora ali na grota, no complexo, o filho dela levou um tiro, morreu. E a dor dela estava tão grande que veio em mim assim e doeu no meu peito. Eu comecei a chorar. Na hora, eu falei assim, cara, vamos embora, vamos subir.
A gente hoje, olhando para dentro do espetáculo, a gente vê que tem tudo de todo mundo ali. E não é só dos atores, não só dos atores, não só da direção. Tem um olhar das pessoas que atuaram dentro da coisa, né? Atuaram no sentido de que colocaram a mão e tem um pouco do coração de todo mundo ali.
É o papo reto mesmo, assim, é o espetáculo. O espetáculo tá berrando o que a gente quer fazer, sabe, para a nossa vida. É falar da nossa essência, é falar de onde que a gente veio, é falar de África, é falar da favela, é falar de quilombo, que as coisas não estão desligadas umas das outras, né? Que apesar dessa violência que a gente sofre, que as coisas estão juntas, né?
Eu nasci na arrecadação da paisagem. num lugar bem desmapeado do mundo. Tudo em volta eram só poeiras, securas, remoinhos. Chuva era sinal dos deuses, sua escassa e rara oferta. E quando eu me punha assim, todo eu inteiramente descalço, todo eu inteiramente nu, era como se os divinos destinassem aquela água toda só para mim. Essa é a única saudade que eu tenho. Que cai um muitão de água até chover dentro de mim, pingar meus tetos da cabeça e me aguar o coração, e eu possa sentir que Deus está me lavando de toda a poeira que a vida me sujou.
I am the runaround city. I was born out of this ambush. First, they came in warships. They began with swords, muskets, and cannons. Next, they came with machetes, clubs, and rifles. Then they came with pistols, 12 gauges, AR-15s, 38 specials, grenades. They got everyone with their bullets. I am the runaround city. I was born out of this strafing of bullets. I was born out of the rape of a bullet, out of a rail of bullets. I don't even know who my father is. It seems like I was born out of thick lead, opening holes in my flesh, opening holes in the huts, the stilt houses, and the shacks. And they entered like this, opening everything up. The farmsteads, the thatched roof houses, and all of the folks here in Macurené, in Berlim, em Caixa d'Água, em Bonn, em Corequeté, em Chatuba, Mamburu, Merindiba, em Vira, Vila Cruzeiro, Tarauacá, Parque Proletário. They came here, opening up holes in our eyes, our mouths, our wombs, our gums, our throats, our uterus. I am the runaround city. I will ask Patrick to translate.
Eu sou a cidade correria. Nasci dessa emboscada. Primeiro eles chegaram de caravela. Começaram com espada, mosquete, canhão. Depois teçado, porrete e carabina. Aí vieram com cano, metralhadora, AR-15, 38, granada. E eles comeram geral. Eles comeram geral na bala. Eu sou a cidade correria. Nasci da rajada de bala me comendo o estupro de uma bala. Uma saraivada. Nem sei quem é meu pai. Parece que nasci de chumbo grosso, abrindo buraco na minha carne. Abrindo buraco nas malocas, nas palafitas e nos barracos. E eles entravam assim, abria tudinho. O roçado, os tapiri, abriam a gente toda aqui. No Macurenem, Curequeté, Chatuba, Muru, Merendiba, Envira, Vila Cruzeiro, Tarauacá, Parque Proletário, Berlim.
So, this is a part of a text from our first play, Cidade Correria, Run Around City. We are together since 2014. In this scene, the cast forms a boat. You could watch it at the movie, suggesting the diaspora of enslaved African people brought to Brazil, but also bring the scene to the present with references to the contemporary incidents of genocide in Brazil. When I read this text out loud, I feel strange. Me, my body, I, here. It seems to me that it doesn't fit my voice. it doesn't fit my body. A white middle-class woman that also teaches at the university. Or to put it better, the text becomes more potent, in my opinion, when it's spoken by specific mouths. In this case, Patrick. One type of scenic creation that keeps appearing in contemporary Brazilian theater makes visible the kind of bodies that, in general, are not present in certain contexts of art. Here, I am talking about the bodies of black or peripheral actors and actresses that, in this perverse way that Brazilian society is reflected on stage, are still rarely seen in arts. 2, our debate on this round table is about the abyss of ethnology. You can read the idea on the program, but the proposal brings a question that I would like to think about with you. It's a question from Hubert Fichte. I quote, "Is it a disgrace to admit that one conducts research into the Wolof because one is gay?" I could answer easily for Fichte. Yes, of course, you can. Of course, no problem. But, so I bring for us now. So, every 23 minutes, a young black man is killed in Brazilian, now. How to get out of this abyss in free fall? How to make the leap beyond the abyss? We are searching this. The reversal of the logic of ethnographic hierarchy was the antidote attempt against the black body fetish in Hubert Fichte's texts. In Bonobando's process of creation, I'm sorry, my English totally mixed with my German, so I'm really sorry about my accent, okay? The reversal of the logic of it. In Bonobando's process of creation and production for the works of the currently exhibition, the relationship between comicality and politics has become a key to create tension between the micro and the macro politics. The procedures from our process by making evident these specificities and urgencies, which historically have been excluded from hegemonic niches within the arts, could serve, in my opinion, to update and amplify discussions about arts, politics, and ethnography. 3, for us is important the diversity of experiences, of life stories, and of dissenting practices. The diversity is marked both by the actors, who are favela residents, but also by the directors, who lives in the middle classes zones in my city, for example. These contradictions have not been eliminated. On the contrary, they remain active, promoting the practice of continuous dissent, choosing to pursue a process of radical collective creation was fundamental in our attempt to break with these hierarchical practices, or else to create a critical attitude to the mechanisms they represent. Coupled with this attempt, it was and still is necessary for all of Coletivo Bonobando's artists to exercise forms of self-decolonization as discussed, for example, by Frantz Fanon. It's possible to speak of an urgent art made by insurgent bodies that bear specific strategies and that acquire potency through their connections to specific subjects. This urgent art places debates about identity in local context directly on stage. In this sense, as I see it, the conceptual contribution of decolonial studies has shown itself to be an effective means to analyzing these contemporary artistic and cultural contexts, When I observe that it's necessary to problematize contemporary artistical practices through works that correspond in potency to certain bodies and not to others, I am risking a radical decolonial exercise as a project necessary for breaking apart hegemonic sensitivities. I arrived here in Germany last September to do postdoctoral research with a grant from the Humboldt Foundation. My work here is about, it's a kind of white ethnography. I am writing about Kaspertheater an der Nationalsozialistische Zeit. So this is like the proposal of Michel Mathieu's in his work, this inversion, this reversion. Since I arrived, it's remarkable to see the presence of decolonial debate in the arts and among artists, as well as in the university where I am. I am at the Department of Anthropology at Universität Bonn. The theoretical virtuosity catches my attention. But it's also bizarre to realize that the understanding that the decolonial processes are not theoretical debates, and far from being really understood. Decolonization of oneself requires daily effort, attention, and review of privileges. It's a bodily action. Change is radically behavioral. We are at the end of the world, okay? We agree? It takes a radical change in ways of life. Anything less of this, in my opinion, is hypocrisy and extractivism. 4. I will quote I speak of Patrick during a conversation we had with Cynthia Guedes. The small speech is from a book that was added by the artist from Fichta's project in Brazil. In this interview, we are talking to Cynthia Guedes, who organized this book with Amilcar and Max, I think. I don't remember. So, Patrick says, so the book, it's problematic in many ways. The first thing is that we blacks are debating about a white guy's book that came here to see blacks. So it's problematic. But I think it's also up to do the service. Here comes the issue of work, right? It's up to the job to think about it, to debate about it, to analyze about it, and to create about it. I think maybe this work is a response work of how we don't see each other. Understood? I think maybe this is the job, right? Because it's so hard. Because there are Islams inside Islams. There are communities within communities. There are blacks inside blacks. So we are not a landscape that you look, hey, everything, like it was monotonous, right? Because the Bonobando, perhaps, we had to break with these trenches, with the hegemonic logic that is implemented on these institutions, NGOs in Brazilian specific. Because we are not a figure, not a monotonous landscape, because at first they think about us that we are young people, black people, periphericals, so they think, let's help them. In a sense, yes, we will help them because they need it. But it turned out that somehow it wasn't quite like that. That berimbau is not really harmonica. Brazilians know this quote, berimbau não é gaita. Because, well, Thiago is graduated, Carla is graduated, Marcelo knows some countries around the world, I know some countries around the world, Lívia has already left the country, you see? So we have a relationship with the city and the world that may not fit this book, you know? It does not fit. We discussed the need for an ethics and produces a critical counterpoint to stereotypes that guide the understanding of discussions, practices, productions, and receptions of non-hegemonic scenes. The critic is quite insightful for social science research schemes, especially with regard to the extractivism of subjectivities, the objectification of subjects and human beings, practices still in vogue in certain intellectual and artistical contexts. It also points to the danger of co-optation of the debate of decoloniality, even if it does not directly cite this notion. As Silvia Kuzikanki says, the decolonial is a fashion, the post-colonial is a desire, and the anti-colonial is a fight. The last quote, 5. It is 2019 now, and there is still no legitimate recognition of the artistic and intellectual fields of production in the so-called peripheries, either in terms of the subjective way that these productions are seen and understood, as well as in their productive objectivity. Oof. If you accompany existing public policy for these segments and territories in recent years, especially in Brazil, you can see that it's a one-way street. In other words, as part of a so-called social compensation productions from the center promote a sort of cultural colonization of the supposed artistic and cultural gaps of the outskirts. Peripheral social agents have begun to problematize these contexts and these productions through discourses that aim to reconsider the opposition between center and periphery. Last page. The term periphery has become a kind of inductive concept involving a very important rhetorical field of legitimization. I will finish with a dialogue that is also in the book that we did as a huge dialogue of all this fantastic project. Thank you very much, Didrich, and also Anselm, and all of the people that are inside of this. So, Carla, it's a problem, but the problem is already in his narrative, right? Tiago, yeah. Carla, yeah. So he builds images, but he's also building his image, right? While someone who is seeing superficialities and is loving it, earning money, but it's not. The problem is not so big because we are here problematizing, right? It's obvious that we won't be able to handle it, to question all that. But it's interesting that we are here as a collective whose members are mostly black, and there is this diversity among us that we understand as our power. Speaking of this guy, right? Tiago. Even the translation itself is done by another white guy. It's a white guy who writes, another white guy rewrites. And if we didn't have this translation, it would be the Germans and the people who understand the German language who would read it. And when we got here, we would come up with this framework, this thought, these stereotypes. Carla, no. And a white publisher publishes the book, and it's a white bookstore that sells, Patrick, on a white paper, laughs, several overlapping lines, ideas about this. Patrick, in a white room, the white chair there, damn it, the white wall. Cynthia, the wall is at least a little dirt. Laugher, Patrick, damn. And there is the white fan, damn it. Then Marcelo comes with the white shirt. Oh, I will stop here, laughs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks so. Yeah. Am I on? Yeah. Thanks so much, Adriana. I mean, there's, I guess, already so much for us to catch up with later, but I think I just feel that the question of the relationship of embodiment and language to dealing with ruins of violence, then caught up and overwhelmed by intensification of violence, might be one of the questions that also connect the two presentations we heard so far. I'd like to ask Rosa Eidelpes to speak now. Thank you.
Yeah, my talk is going to be rather academic. Sorry for that. Different style and topic. So, yeah, I'd like to begin with stating what has been said already many times during this conference and also during the opening of the exhibition, that Hubert Fichte's work, of course, was not isolated from the intellectual and political context of his time. He had friends, he had allies, he had what you call parallel figures, also in Germany, that he was communicating with, that he was inspired by. And on the other hand, Fichte's literary approach to ethnography was inspiration, blueprint, and starting point for many young students, soon to be professionals and lay aficionados of an area of interest that was academically represented by the discipline called ethnology. So, literary scholars like Peter Braun and others already pointed out Fichte's affiliation with contemporary German ethnology. Largely following these works, I would like to argue today that Fichte was part of a very specific semi-academic field that existed only in the 1970s and early 1980s in the Federal Republic of Germany. And more precisely, borrowing a term that was used frequently by insiders of this field, I claim that Fichte's work was closely connected to the quest for an alternative ethnology. Now, what is or was alternative ethnology? So I'd like to begin by looking at the debates in one of the many student-based ethnological scenes in the late 1970s. You can see some of them here. I'm sorry for the quality of the scan. These scenes were non-commercial, self-made publications, and they were imitating, obviously, the pop cultural genre of fanzine. I guess you remember that, these typed, photocopied, quickly glued journals that were made to circulate. So these ethnocines, they wanted to promote a discussion on contemporary ethnological theories and methods. And here I have some more pictures. This is another one. I'll talk about this one in a bit. And yeah, so... yeah, these scenes, together with volumes that were mostly edited by small independent publishing houses such as Syndikat or Trikont and others, they served as main organs and platforms in the process of self-understanding. In one of the early issues of the ethnocene Trickster, that you can see here, from 1978, two students named Ortrud and Charlotte write about their vision of an alternative ethnology. And I quote, I'm translating, of course. In the science of humankind and the science for humankind, there is no place for scientific objectivity. It is not about the question what we will know or don't know, but how we are going to live and how we are going to love. So, for students like Ortrud and Charlotte, ethnology was more than just the name of an academic discipline. It was the title for a much bigger, all-embracing project, the quest for new ways of living and world perception. Situated at the margins of academic anthropology, alternative ethnology was clearly an offshoot of the 1970s counterculture. By the end of the 1970s, the loss of revolutionary hopes, the rising consciousness for third world politics during the Cold War especially, and the formation of the environmental movement went along with an unprecedented ethno-romantic enthusiasm for non-Western, non-capitalist and seemingly uncorrupted forms of life and society. This widespread passion not only brought about a considerable economic success for a very specific genre of semi-academic ethnological literature, but also led to an exploding number of new students in the field of ethnology. By studying non-European cultures, an entire generation hoped to gain access to ecological and social alternatives. But then once at university, they encountered a rather stagnating and ossified discipline that was barely able to cope with the sudden rise of interest. And this was another reason why students left the seminar rooms to form an ethnological counterculture. And many of them were involved in grassroots groups and self-organized so-called ethno-meetings, where they did not only discuss specialized ethnological literature, but also lost themselves in collective readings of Carlos Castañeda's anthropological fiction, for example. Still, the quest for an alternative ethnology claimed to be more than just an academic version of hippie culture. If you have thought that, they wanted to be more. The idea was, that was often raised throughout the discussions, was to make ethnology a critical meta-science, a challenge for scientific positivism, an instrument to overcome hierarchic subject-object relations and the epistemic foundations of traditional science. One of the publications that was situated at the margins of the academic landscape was the journal Ethnomedicine, that was edited by the Hamburg ethnologist Joachim Sterli. And Sterli was also Fichte's academic mentor. And for example, he called for Fichte's first book on African American religions, Shango, from 1976, to be accepted as a doctoral dissertation at the University of Bremen. Didn't work out, but still. In Ethnomedicine, Fichte published several and pretty serious and scientific ethnobotanical articles on his research on hallucinogenic plants that are used in candomblé rituals and on medical herbs. And also he reported on the self-experiments with plants and herbs that he and Leonore Mau undertook. So ethnomedicine was a reform-orientated and critical towards traditional science. In an article from 1979, Joachim Sterli writes about the connections between scientific positivism and colonialism, and I quote, translating rather freely here, I quote Sterli, "But in the end, what is the scientific object? Can we look at it in an unbiased way, or doesn't it become, in retrospect, the prey? We would do well to ask ourselves about the significance that the objective point of view had for the colonial expansion of Europe." End of quote. Sterli's criticism on the entanglements between ethnology and colonialism was largely shared in the field of this unorthodox or self-declared alternative ethnology. In the first and programmatic issue of the journal Procrustes, which was later then renamed Trickster, but kept the subtitle Against Eurocentric Thinking, it reads, I think it is an anonymous article, quote, "To grasp science anew is not possible without a different approach to theories and methods, and it is not possible without the engagement of your own individuality and subjectivity. Thus, what we have to overcome is a twofold distance: the distance between myself and science, and between science and its object." End of quote. So I would like to assert that the turn from objectivity to subjectivity was the crucial point in this quest for an alternative ethnology. And at the same time, I think that the turn to subjectivity is also the moment where this enterprise called alternative ethnology reveals its self-referential nature. Since beyond the criticism of colonialism and positivist science, for a good many of the aspiring alternative ethnologists, the pursuit of subjectivity was first and foremost a project of self-transformation. Practicing ethnology for them meant working on the emancipation from Western modes of self-relation and critically questioning European subjectivity. So the Munich student Andrea, for example, describes her thoughts in the already mentioned magazine Trickster as follows, quote, "To develop an alternative ethnology means to think with like-minded people about how we could strike our way through the jungle of existence, far, far from the established beaten tracks." And in the same issue of Trickster, Werner Petermann, who later became a professional ethnologist, but at the time was part of the editorial board, he names as central motivation of his generation, I quote, "the wish to abolish one's own alienation by bringing the human and the scientific together again and legitimize the subjective," end of quote. And as we can see here in the last quote, many of the debates on what alternative ethnology is or could be referred to Marx's notion of alienation as a product of capitalism, but now formulating the idea that ethnology could be the instrument to abolish this estrangement. So let me explain that a little bit further. In the discussion of what an alternative ethnology is or could be, a key role was ascribed to the ethnographic method of participant observation. To spend as much time in the field as possible and to be as close as possible with the studied other societies was perceived as the most intense and authentic encounter with a foreign culture. Moreover, the ethnographic field trip was idealized as deliberate form of estrangement from Western culture, as consciously and willfully induced experience of alienation, an alienation second stage, so to say. And I think it is no coincidence and not solely due to the fact that German ethnology had so far not undertaken any theory building in this direction, that the reflections on the ethnographic field trip became a central topic at the time. The ethnologist Fritz Kramer edited the first German edition of Malinowski's Argonauts of the Western Pacific with Syndikat Verlag in 1979, which of course is a key work on the method of participant observation. In his own and much discussed book Verkehrte Welten zur imaginären Ethnographie des 19. Jahrhunderts, which translates into Worlds Upside Down, the imaginary ethnography of the 19th century, that came out in 1981, also with Syndikat. Kramer criticizes the notion of objectivity in ethnology. He assumes that participant observation leads to a precarious experience for both the ethnological subject, the researcher, and his object, the members of the research societies. According to Kramer, modern ethnographic fieldwork creates a situation in which both sides try to approach each other by mimicking each other. That is, they approach each other through the mimetic imitation of their counterpart. For Kramer, this is a situation that the ethnologist him or herself cannot completely control, but to which he or she is exposed to rather passively. In order to participate, the researcher has to adopt parts of the foreign culture and give up some of his own cultural identity. He or she thus undergoes an experience of foreignness or alterity that changes his self-perception in the long term. So taking up Kramer's ideas, and not always in the sense he meant it, and also radicalizing them, many aspiring alternative ethnologists hoped for such an experience of alterity or estrangement. So this is the point, at least, that I want to make here, that looking at it in retrospect, the project called Alternative Ethnology turns out to be part of a project of self-transformation and a quest for renewed subjectivity. And ideally, this is a new subjectivity was based on also on new sensitive and more passive modes of perception and on the ability to alter oneself. And I think that the popularity of ethnology and the fact that for a short period of time it was, at least in Germany, considered to have the potential to become a leading science has to be seen against the backdrop of the social and economic changes of the time in Germany and Europe in general. And that is the enforced economic globalization, the emergence of the so-called creative industry, and new neoliberal working conditions that required a new flexible subject with artistic as well as intercultural skills. An individual with a new and heightened sensitivity, so to say. So how does Fichte relate to all this? I would like to suggest that we look at his work as a part of this historical context of the 1970s that had a lot to do with the renegotiation of European or German subjectivity. And although, of course, I know that he had a very special definition of sensitivity as a form of globalized gay sex culture. But still, I think that his work, if he may have liked it or not, or I don't think that it's a fact that his works, if he may have liked it or not, were a central point of reference for the self-declared alternative ethnologist, especially when it came to the question of ethnological representation and new forms of ethnographic writing. So with his quest for a new form of ethnographic research and writing, Fichte obviously was not alone. At the surface, it was the critique of colonialism, Eurocentrism, and scientific positivism of the federal German academic ethnology of the 1970s that united Fichte with his fellow unorthodox ethnologists. But I think in the more hidden layers of his work, or in the subtext, so to say, we can find other premises, hopes, fears, and concerns that he shared with his contemporaries. For example, I think that Fichte's fascination with trance rituals in Afro-Brazilian religions is related to the widespread interest in practices of self-transformation and mind-altering drugs. Even though Fichte always kept his distance from the psychedelic 1970s, he admits these affinities himself when he, in the journal Ethnomedicine, when he justifies his research interest in trance by stating that, I quote, "The knowledge of the transformation of the individual through herbal substances is relevant to the concerns of our entire generation," end of quote. And at the same time, his criticism of Afro-American trance practices as a form of brainwashing, he uses this term quite often in his articles, especially in his more scientific and political articles. This criticism reflects the fear of a totalitarian state power and a widespread feeling of other-directedness and alienation that was plaguing post-war German society, especially during the Cold War. And I'm not going into this, but you can read an article I wrote about this this is a commercial break, on the web journal, www.projectfichte.org. Genau. Yeah, and I think I stop here. Preparing this talk, I thought that I add another paragraph trying to be just and also mentioning that Fichte, of course, he was also a critical observer of his generation, and that he was especially criticizing this fetishizing of the field trip as being neo-colonial and all of this. But I think since I understood that this panel is more like a controversial or critical one, I stop here and leave it up to you to discuss this, defend him, or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to hand over the microphone immediately to Yesomi because we are a bit running behind time. You take all your time. I will then ask for maybe a 15-minute extension or shift in the overall schedule since we started a bit late as well. Yesomi.
Great. Thank you, Anselm, and thanks to my panelists. Provided a lot of food for thought. I have to apologize, I'm a little bit sick, so I might struggle through this, but I curated the show in New York, and the reason I guess I was drawn to this project and the approach that Anselm and Dietrich were taking was that for a number of years I've been looking at the sort of conflation of ethnographic methodologies and processes with a sort of avant-garde artistic practice, particularly looking at the French avant-garde. And this is a project that sort of consumed me for a number of years as I was dealing with the sort of problematics of looking back at histories in the 50s and 60s in Europe and questions around othering and the consumption of otherness that kind of came to inform the European avant-garde, from the Surrealist to Fluxus, and I would even suggest developed to much later on in the European canon of art practice. And of course, I'm doing all of this from my position in London as a member of the African diaspora, as somebody who can claim heritage to Yoruba traditions, as well as Afro-Brazilian traditions on my mother's side. But as someone who is very much a post-colonial subject, a migrant subject, and who was trained in a particular Anglophone, I guess, rendering of multiculturalism and critical theory and critical race theory. So I'm using all this knowledge from the place that I sit in London to try and think about these figures in the 1960s in Paris. I also happen to have a sort of slight admiration for Francophone cultures. So that's how I came to this project, and I thought it was interesting to engage in it as a sort of extension of my research. But I was also intrigued by the methodology and process that the two curators and I guess Dietrich and Anselm took, which is to sort of take the work back from the center out to the sites of otherness, and to think about how the work can be read in those contexts in the present day. And I think that was a very valuable process to kind of engage in, and clearly shows their acumen in trying to rethink how one can confront avant-garde practices and artifacts such as this, and to kind of acknowledge a sort of like international nature of knowledge production. So the question then becomes, what happens when this work is recentered here in Berlin and here in Germany? How is it read and how is it understood? And that's been something that has been irking me, I guess is a good word, troubling me, especially as I made this trip to be part of this panel and to see the exhibition and how it might function here in this institution, in this city. And I think that it's something that I'm still unsure about in terms of how this is going to be, this sits here and how it's going to be received here. And I'd originally thought about presenting something that sort of, maybe following on from my colleagues, that looked at this question of otherness within avant-garde art practices and how ficta might be understood as existing within a sort of constellation of ideas that were prevalent at a particular moment in Europe. I had fantastic quotes by Hal Foster and Raymond Russell and many other people to try and kind of contextualize ficta's work. I also had a series of sound clips by Michael Chisholm, who was one of Ficta's interlocutors in New York in the late 70s. And we had a sort of telephone conversation very early on in the process of curating the show in New York. And he provided some great insight into Ficta's motivations, which I think have been sort of surfaced here, so I don't feel the necessity to repeat them. So I guess what I want to do now is sort of throw myself into the abyss. And throw ourselves into the abyss, and understand that we don't have that much time, but there has been a lot said, I think, in this forum over the last day and a half, and you guys have listened attentively to kind of our impressions and opinions about Hubert Fichte, but I'm actually really interested in what your thoughts are, and from the place where you guys are standing, how do you receive this work? How does it connect to kind of contemporary discourses in Germany? How might it be productive or unproductive? And so I'm going to ask that some microphones be distributed, and that the folks that identify in the room as being from Berlin, of German nationality and heritage, you tell me what you think about this practice. And that's what we're going to do for the next, I think, 15 minutes or 10 minutes of my session. I understand this might be really difficult for everyone, and also I think that what's really interesting is how language functions, and I'm being Anglophone, I'm loving this context, because I sort of, English is the sort of primary tool of communication, and I can dip into Portuguese, but I also welcome you to speak in German if you want, and speak amongst yourselves. I don't need to necessarily understand everything that you're saying, but I think it's really important so that when you guys leave here, that you have had the opportunity to speak, because I think a lot of people have spoken through, on behalf of, parallel to Hubert Fichte, and given that he is a sort of exponent of this context, I think it's important that you guys speak as well. So let's get things going.
Maybe we can get the light up for that, and is there anyone who might...
Oh, there's a hand up.
Great, thank you. Yes, you need.
There's a mic coming.
This is a spontaneous return to your offer to discuss it. I haven't thought it very much through yet, but I picked up on some critical voices this afternoon in the panel. Anselm Franke in his introduction saying that he and the others involved in the curatorial project are very much aware of the problematics of centering a white Western German male in this project, dealing with decoloniality and so on. But I haven't really seen or heard, not having seen the exhibition, though I admit, from the panel, I haven't yet really seen or heard how one actually deals with this question. Why are we talking about someone very interesting, but why are we not talking about someone else who might be very interesting, who is not white, male, Western German, etc.? So how do people feel about, why don't we dig up other people to talk about? And what is it that makes it so important to talk about him? I mean, he's a super fascinating figure, I admit it, but there are many others in the world too. So I'm just throwing this out, and I wonder if other people feel similarly. I can imagine there are people in the non-Western, other parts of the world that might say, we don't really want to have to deal with these figures over and over again, as fascinating as they might be. So I don't know if there's anyone who wants to respond to that.
Is there anyone in the room?
It's not meant as a critique towards the curators, because I know they've dealt with this question surely many times in the iterations across the world. So I'd just be very happy to hear some of those points or some of the results of those conversations that you've had. Anyone involved in this project, or just at the periphery of the project. Thank you.
You would have to allow me, as much as I'd like to answer. I think the project was slightly different, the idea, and I would really like to see, I mean, whether there's some more responses that would speak about how they feel about the work, or what kind of attachments or repulsions, or like to just go on with what Yesomi has proposed.
Ich habe eine Frage an Frau Eidelpes. Sprechen Sie sich so aus? Ja.
Entschuldigung, darf ich Sie unterbrechen?
Ja.
Wir machen gerade keine klare Fragesession, sondern es ist gerade die Frage in den Raum gegeben, dass Menschen von hier aus in der Sprachcommunity über die Bedeutung, die Hubert Fichtes Werk für sie hat, sprechen. Das ist gerade ein bisschen anderes Setting. Wenn wir noch Zeit haben sollten, komme ich gerne auf Sie zurück.
Okay.
Well, I'm afraid I can't testify to this because I've been somewhere else when Hubert Fichte was important in Germany. So I was very interested indeed in the question that was put at the beginning, kind of throwing the ball back to the people who have been somehow won over to participate in this project. And I'm very, very keen to know, because I know from Dietrich that many people he got involved, and you too got involved with this project. What were your reasons? Because I guess Hubert Fichte was not just like a family name to all of you. So the people who are sitting up there are only a small part of the project. But perhaps you could give me, or us, if others are interested too, some kind of clue for this engagement.
You would have to again allow me to deflect this. Because this is again a question to the panel. We're collecting it, and if we're collecting it, and
okay. Hi, Tiana. Would like to hear. I'm gonna try to. I'm not. Yesomi posed a really, really, really good question that a lot of us. She's not the only one who's been thinking. You all have come in. I've been at the opening. I was at the press run. You looking at these works. You're looking at this man. What do you think about Hubert Fichte? Those who are German, born and raised, live in this country. This is my first time visiting. I would like to know, I have only a couple of more hours here, what you think about Hubert Fichte. Do not ask us. They've written a book. I've written an essay in the book. I would like to know, in this extraordinarily didactic presentation, where you get to read everything about this man and us, what do you think about Hubert Fichte?
Okay, hi. Yeah, I think somehow my reading of Hubert Fichte is probably really connected to the questions that were posed now before I talked and that were dismissed. Because I think I got into Hubert Fichte's works 2 or 3 years ago, and I started with Eine glückliche Liebe, and I was extremely taken by the lecture of it, because there's there's a queer perspective, and also an approach to ethnography that I didn't expect within the German language, because I think when we discuss here also in German academia queer theories and queer feminist theories and decolonial practices, we rely a lot on the canons that are not rooted in Germany. So we rely on authors from the US a lot, from the UK sometimes, so then I was like, oh wow, there's a German voice. And I think this kind of excitement, oh, there's a German voice that could somehow link to these approaches. This is the excitement I also see in the curation of
of this whole project. But like to a certain point, I'm a little bit irritated now because I also doubt my excitement. Like the question, is this really a decolonial approach that we can read in Hubert Fichte? And I think I've been like a little bit disappointed within the exhibition and also the panels I witnessed today, because I feel like it raises the question like, oh, now we're centering everything about that guy. It's problematic, we know. But like, what is actually problematic about this? We haven't really touched upon. And then I go through the exhibition and I like read through the notes, and the first thing is like, yeah, this work deals with that, and the connection to Hubert Fichte is like, you know, like tying it back to this persona. So yeah, I haven't figured it out myself, because I think like my excitement comes from the same place of, wow, there's a German voice that we can link to these discourses. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a microphone here too. I don't know, I'm not an academic, I'm just a visitor who likes to surround herself with academics and art and stuff. So I probably talk from a very, I don't know, a not a known position. There are a lot of things, or there are maybe 3 things that touched me today. And this is these are very personal things, but I think this was the question, to have personal answer on what touches you, or what do you recognize something? So when I came this morning, I read with a friend, I read these pamphlets before you go into the exhibition of the cities where the exhibition was. And I will skip the discussion, but I was happy to see that. I was happy. I know I was not happy. It's just there's a lot of how do I say this the right way? I think I started with Dakar, and Dakar was in English and in Spanish, French, of course. Was in English and in French, and I just met my aunties who were 80, German aunties. They don't speak English really. So I thought, okay, but they are interested in culture and in contemporary. They're emotional old women. So if they would be in front of this thing, they would not be able to read that. So that would be kind of a disappointment. But then they would walk on, and then I came to, I don't know what it was. I think it was Brazil and there was one part was in German. And then I thought, yeah, that's good. So it's different. Some of them it's in English and French, some of it is in English and in Portuguese, and then you have some German. So this was one point that I liked, that it's so, it's not, okay, it has to be like this, but it can be a little, but everyone can have some of that. Also my 80-year-old aunties who don't know any English. There are 2 other points that touched me, but I think I've said enough.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I cannot reply to the question. But I can maybe comment on the discussion or the discourse here, in the sense that I think it's very hard to reply to the question, because for a viewer like me, I cannot separate the oeuvre of Hubert Fichte from the prerequisites of the exhibition. So I could not, even if I was an expert on Hubert Fichte's work, which I'm not. I'm a kind of a promeneur, and I've been in touch with the work time and again, but I probably wouldn't know enough to really say what do I think about, and I don't think about many things. I'd rather think along with things and so on. But I think it is really hard also for the audience here to totally separate, to say, okay, now we're going to say what we think about the work without stating how Hubert Fichte operates as a navigator in that constellation. So that's just all I want to say, and so it's not personal take on Hubert Fichte, but maybe we should open it a bit still to comments on the exhibition, not strictly remain with, I think it should be a bit more open towards because that is the question of the exhibition itself. I mean, it is the core of the exhibition. What does a white German male person from active between the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s mean as a constellation, as a starting point that then turns into a completely different constellation? So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I was born in Germany in 1961, and I tend to think about my upbringing and my youth and my childhood as being located in a still very much post-fascist state, in a non-academic family, and I think about my childhood as a time in which, through fascism, everything which was intellectual, which was erotic, which was beauty, which was making sense, was very much destroyed. So it was a very empty upbringing. And I read Fichte, and I always read Fichte together with the photos of Leonore Mau. So I didn't perceive him so much as a white man, but as a part of a non-heterosexual couple production. I read him when I was 17, and then he brought me into cultural anthropology. And I was very much disappointed. Then I was part of the lost generation of thousands of students entering anthropology in the late 70s and early 80s, because what I thought, this radical opening up of sensitivities, that I could find that in that academic discipline. That was a radical, almost violent disappointment. But then as a student, I would walk to the Bücherei Ludwig in Cologne every week and look at the photo books of Leonore Mau and read all of Fichte. And it was like having a trace of something, a promise of something other than this destroyed German Nachkriegszeit, this emptiness, this concrete suburbs. So I think there is a promise in it. Even so, I mean, the position might be his position might be a very complex and problematic position, but the force of the language and the photos for a 17, 18, 19-year-old in Germany in the 1970s, that was a real force.
One last.
I'm another generation, but I think what it makes him interesting for us as white Europeans is that he's also a white European as we are. And in this whole post-colonial discourse, it's always difficult to find an own position, because maybe you have a critical position towards that, but you have always the feeling, but I don't have really the right to speak, and I don't have really I don't know exactly where to take my position. Because it's exactly as you said, why are we interested in these sort of people? Why are we not interested in other sort of people? But we are these sort of people. And so I think it's interesting to have someone who is also struggling with this position, because maybe we are also struggling. And I think this makes him, even when I did not grow up with him, to me it is an important figure because of that.
Thank you. I think we're going to switch, but before we do, I'm going to throw Anselm and Hashkeve back into the abyss again. I think it's really important in the coming months of this show being up, and I don't know if there's plans already, to create forums for such conversations, because I think it's so rich, the sort of intergenerational significance of Fichte between people who were born maybe in that moment of the war era and post-war, and a younger generation who might be rediscovering him. So I think there's something to do with like intergenerational connections. And I think one of the great things about this project is that it has created spaces for discourse and conversation to kind of confront some of these larger questions that I think we're all asking ourselves, whether we are in the perceived center or not. And I think it's really important that those forums happen here, because we are all colonial subjects and we are all imperial subjects. And what I find interesting is to understand how your perspective is in relation to this work and how my perspective is in relation, and where there might be common ground, but also where there might not be common ground as well. So that's a project that I'm hoping that Hashkeve will be able to do over the next couple of months. Forgive me if I'm already suggesting something that is already going to happen, but I think the onus is on you guys to continually, because this work is going to die, you know, in this sort of museological setting, and we need to kind of like keep it alive through discussion and discourse. So that would be my last comment.
Thank you so much, Somi. I'm really grateful for the flippings of the script you just did, and where it like several things are hanging in the room, but we are so late that I cannot give it more room by any means. So for those who actually asked back at the panel, you have to do it outside when we have coffee, or you have to do it during the next panel, which I think will get much more specifically into some of the issues of the local relevance and the form, etc. Anyway.
But say 15 minutes later.
15 minutes later than announced here, and a lot of the why questions, at this point I can only say some of it we hopefully answer to some degree in the book we've worked on, and in the online platform where there is a lot of these vectors reflected. Thank you very much. True.